Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the job you depend on might not exist 10 years from now. Not because your company is failing, not because you are performing poorly, but because the entire economic system around work is quietly changing. For decades, people believed that if they studied hard, built skills, and worked consistently, employment would eventually bring stability. A steady career meant predictable income, long-term planning, and a sense that the future could be controlled through effort. But across many countries today, that feeling of stability is fading. Workers increasingly describe the modern labor market as uncertain, competitive, and constantly shifting. Even highly educated professionals sometimes worry about layoffs, automation, outsourcing, or industry disruption. Economic surveys and labor market studies show that employment itself has not disappeared. In fact, in many developed economies, employment rates remain historically high. However, the feeling of job security has changed dramatically because the structure of work is evolving faster than the expectations people built during earlier decades. Labor market research shows that employment growth in many advanced economies has slowed compared with earlier periods of rapid expansion, while technological change and global competition continue reshaping how companies hire and organize work. At the same time, technological transformation is affecting the skills required for employment. According to research discussed by the International Monetary Fund, nearly 40% of global jobs could be exposed to changes caused by artificial intelligence and automation, meaning tasks within many occupations may be altered, replaced, or significantly transformed. This does not necessarily mean all those jobs will disappear, but it does mean that the nature of work itself is shifting in ways that can make employment feel less predictable than before. The question many workers now ask is simple but powerful. Why does employment feel more fragile today than it did for previous generations? The answer does not lie in one single crisis or policy decision. Instead, it lies in a series of economic transformations that slowly reshaped how businesses operate, how technology influences productivity, and how global competition affects labor markets. To understand why jobs feel less secure than ever, we need to go back to a time when the structure of work looked very different from today. For much of the 20th century, many economies operated under what economists sometimes describe as the long-term employment model. Workers often joined companies early in their careers and remained with the same employer for many years, sometimes even their entire working lives. Companies invested heavily in training, career progression, and internal promotion systems because retaining skilled workers was seen as essential to long-term productivity. Large corporations, manufacturing industries, and public institutions often provided stable employment structures that encouraged long-term loyalty between employers and employees. This system created a powerful psychological expectation. If someone worked consistently and developed skills, employment would remain stable enough to support long-term life planning, such as buying a home, raising a family, or saving for retirement. But over the last few decades, several forces began quietly changing this arrangement. Globalization expanded the scale of competition, technological innovation accelerated productivity changes, and companies gradually shifted toward more flexible labor structures. Instead of guaranteeing long-term employment, many organizations began prioritizing adaptability, efficiency, and rapid response to market conditions. As global markets became more interconnected, businesses gained the ability to restructure operations quickly, outsource certain functions, and adopt new technologies that reduced reliance on specific roles. These changes did not immediately eliminate jobs, but they altered the expectations surrounding them. Employment gradually became less about long-term permanence and more about continuous adjustment within a rapidly evolving economy. Workers today, therefore, face a different reality from the one previous generations expected. Jobs still exist, but the system around them moves faster, adapts more frequently, and demands constant reskilling to remain competitive. The real twist is that job insecurity today is not driven only by unemployment. In many countries, employment numbers can look healthy, while workers still feel deeply uncertain about the future. This happens because the fear is no longer only about losing work completely. It is about whether today's work will still have value tomorrow. A person may currently be employed, yet still worry that their role could change suddenly, be outsourced, automated, or reorganized within a few years. This psychological shift is one of the most important changes in modern labor markets. Earlier generations often feared recession because recession meant immediate job loss. Modern workers often fear transformation because transformation means the job may survive, but the role inside it may change faster than people can adapt. According to Future of Work reports, businesses across many sectors are already redesigning job structures because digital systems, artificial intelligence, data tools, and automation can now perform parts of tasks that once required full human attention. But what matters is that automation usually removes tasks before it removes full occupations. This means workers often remain employed while quietly noticing that some parts of their job are disappearing or becoming easier for software to handle. Over time, this changes how secure employment feels because workers realize that what made them valuable yesterday may not be enough tomorrow. Another reason jobs feel less secure is that companies themselves have changed how they respond to uncertainty. In earlier decades, businesses often carried larger workforces because production cycles were slower and planning horizons were longer. Today, companies operate in markets where demand can change quickly, consumer behavior shifts rapidly, and financial pressure appears almost instantly through global competition. This means firms increasingly prefer flexibility. Temporary contracts, project-based hiring, outsourced services, and performance restructuring all give companies more room to adapt when conditions change. For businesses, this improves resilience. For workers, it often weakens the feeling of permanence. Even employees in stable positions now understand that companies can reorganize entire departments faster than before if market conditions demand it. This creates an environment where long-term employment exists, but confidence around it becomes weaker. Globalization intensified this further because many businesses no longer compare labor costs only inside one country. A company evaluating operations today may compare wages, regulation, productivity, and digital alternatives across several regions at once. Certain tasks can move internationally, especially where digital communication makes location less important. This does not always mean direct job loss, but it means workers increasingly compete inside broader systems than previous generations ever faced. A local salary is often shaped by global labor economics, even when workers never directly see that competition. Another hidden pressure comes from productivity itself. Productivity usually sounds positive because it means producing more value with fewer resources, but higher productivity can also reduce the number of workers needed for certain processes. One machine, one software platform, or one optimized digital system can now perform tasks that previously required several employees. Historically, economies absorbed these shifts by creating new industries, and that still happens today. But the transition period creates insecurity because workers must move toward new skills before the old ones lose relevance. That transition is rarely smooth. A worker trained for one economic era may discover that the fastest growing opportunities demand very different capabilities. This explains why job insecurity can exist even when new sectors are expanding. Jobs are not disappearing entirely. They are moving unevenly between sectors, and workers often feel uncertain during that movement. Artificial intelligence has amplified this feeling because for the first time, many office workers, analysts, support staff, and even creative professionals see parts of their tasks being accelerated by systems that did not exist a few years ago. The concern is not always replacement. Often, it is uncertainty about future bargaining power. If technology can complete part of the work faster, will salaries grow more slowly, promotions become harder, or hiring become more selective? This uncertainty itself weakens psychological job security even before any direct displacement occurs. Labor researchers repeatedly note that workers adapt best when retraining systems are strong, but many economies still struggle to provide transitions at the speed new technologies evolve. Another reason employment feels fragile is that modern careers no longer move in a straight line. Previous generations often expected upward movement inside one institution. Today, many careers involve lateral moves, sector changes, contract periods, digital freelancing, and repeated skill updates. Some people benefit greatly from this flexibility, but others experience it as instability because there's less predictability about what the next 5 years should look like. Even high-skill workers increasingly think in shorter time horizons because industries themselves can change quickly. What once looked like a permanent sector can face sudden disruption from policy, technology, consumer behavior, or global supply changes. As a result, job security today is often less about whether someone currently has work and more about whether their current work remains strategically valuable inside an economy that constantly reorganizes itself. What makes this even more complex is that job insecurity often increases during periods when economies appear outwardly stable. A person may look at national employment data and see that unemployment remains relatively low, yet still feel personally uncertain because the visible numbers do not fully capture how work is changing underneath the surface. Employment data usually shows whether people are working, but it does not fully reveal how secure they feel inside their roles, how replaceable they believe their skills are, or how often companies quietly restructure responsibilities without public attention. In many sectors, workers now experience what economists sometimes call silent labor adjustment, where companies do not always announce large layoffs, but gradually slow hiring, merge roles, automate tasks, or leave positions unfilled after employees leave. This means fewer dramatic headlines, but a stronger internal sense that the labor market has become less predictable. Employees notice teams becoming smaller, responsibilities becoming wider, and productivity expectations rising without always seeing equivalent long-term guarantees in return. That shift changes how work feels psychologically, even when a person remains employed. Another hidden reason jobs feel less secure is that modern businesses increasingly reward adaptability more than permanence. In earlier decades, experience inside one role often guaranteed stability because deep specialization within a company created long-term value. Today, specialization still matters, but only when paired with flexibility. Workers are increasingly expected to learn new systems, adapt to digital tools, respond to changing market needs, and sometimes perform tasks that did not exist when they first entered the role. This creates pressure not because people resist learning, but because the speed of required adaptation has accelerated. A skill that remained valuable for 20 years in one era may now need major updating within 5 years or less. For younger workers, this often feels normal because they enter careers expecting constant change. For experienced workers, it can feel unsettling because the rules of stability changed while they were already inside the labor market. Another important factor is the growing connection between financial markets and employment decisions. Public companies especially often react quickly to earnings pressure, shareholder expectations, and future forecasts. If revenue slows, restructuring may begin before a full crisis even appears because companies try to protect margins early rather than waiting for visible losses. This means layoffs or hiring freezes sometimes occur not because a company is failing, but because leadership wants to adjust before markets react negatively. Workers inside such systems can therefore feel insecure even when the business remains profitable. They understand that profitability alone no longer guarantees stability if investors expect stronger efficiency. This is very different from older industrial employment models, where large firms often retained labor longer through temporary slowdowns because long production cycles made immediate restructuring less common. Today, digital management allows faster cost adjustments, and workers know that speed exists. Even sectors traditionally viewed as stable now face pressure from rapid transformation. Banking changes through financial technology, education changes through digital learning systems, retail changes through e-commerce, media changes through algorithmic distribution, and logistics changes through automation and predictive systems. The result is that no major sector feels completely untouched by technological or structural pressure. This widespread reach creates a broader social feeling that no profession is permanently safe, only temporarily relevant depending on how quickly the surrounding industry changes. Yet at the same time, entirely new roles continue appearing, often faster than public perception recognizes. Data analysis, digital operations, cybersecurity, AI supervision, platform management, and remote coordination all expanded rapidly within only a few years. This creates an unusual contradiction. The economy continues creating opportunities, but workers often feel insecure because those opportunities may not align immediately with existing skills. In other words, jobs are not vanishing in one simple direction. They are shifting location inside the economy faster than many people can comfortably follow. Another reason insecurity feels stronger today is that personal life planning still depends heavily on predictable income. Buying a home, planning a family, managing debt, or committing to long-term financial goals all require confidence that income will remain stable enough over many years. When workers feel unsure whether their role will remain secure, they often delay those major life decisions even if they are currently employed. This creates a wider social effect where labor uncertainty influences housing markets, savings behavior, and long-term consumption. Economists often note that consumer confidence weakens not only when unemployment rises, but also when people feel uncertain about future income. That means psychological job security matters economically even before actual job loss occurs. And this leads to a larger realization. What workers are experiencing is not simply fear of unemployment, but awareness that modern labor markets are built around faster adjustment than human expectations were originally designed to handle. Jobs still exist, opportunities still appear, and many sectors still grow, but the pace of change itself has become one of the strongest sources of insecurity. The worker who feels uncertain today is often reacting not to immediate danger, but to the growing awareness that staying valuable now requires continuous movement inside a system that rarely stays still for long. And this is where the deeper economic shift finally becomes visible. Jobs feel less secure today because stability itself has changed from being something provided by one employer to something workers are increasingly expected to build through constant adaptability. In earlier economic models, security often came from remaining inside one strong institution for many years. Today, security increasingly depends on whether a worker can remain relevant across changing systems, technologies, and market conditions. That means the definition of job security has quietly moved from permanence to resilience. A person may no longer expect one role to last decades, but instead hopes their skills can survive repeated transitions. This sounds manageable in theory, yet in practice, it changes how people experience work emotionally. When stability depends on constant adaptation, every new technology, every company restructuring, every industry shift, and every policy change becomes personally significant because workers know that future relevance is never guaranteed automatically. This explains why even people with stable salaries often describe feeling uncertain. Their present may be secure, but the future feels conditional. Another important realization is that modern job insecurity is often strongest, not in collapsing sectors, but in sectors undergoing rapid innovation. The faster an industry changes, the harder it becomes for workers to predict what experience will still matter several years later. A professional may perform well today, yet still wonder whether software, automation, or new business models will reshape the role before long-term plans become possible. This uncertainty spreads beyond the workplace because income decisions influence everything else: housing, family planning, debt tolerance, savings, and long-term confidence. When employment feels less predictable, people often become more cautious in every other financial decision as well. This is one reason labor insecurity can influence the wider economy even when official employment remains relatively strong. Households spend differently when they feel uncertain, save differently when future income feels fragile, and delay major commitments when careers seem less predictable than before. Governments and institutions increasingly recognize this challenge, which is why so many labor policies now focus on retraining, digital skills, and lifelong learning rather than only job creation itself. The assumption is clear. In a rapidly changing economy, creating resilience may matter as much as creating employment. But even strong retraining systems cannot fully remove uncertainty because economic transformation never moves evenly. Some workers adapt quickly, others need more time, and some sectors change faster than public policy can respond. This means job insecurity is likely to remain a defining feature of modern labor markets, not because work is disappearing entirely, but because the speed of adjustment remains high. Yet, this does not mean the future of work is simply negative. Economic history repeatedly shows that major transitions create anxiety before new forms of stability eventually emerge. Industrialization disrupted old labor systems before new industries created broader prosperity. Digitalization replaced some roles while opening entirely new professions. What feels uncertain now may partly reflect another long transition where the rules of work are being rewritten before society fully adapts to them. The challenge is that people experience transitions personally long before they appear clearly in long-term statistics. A worker facing uncertainty today does not feel part of a historical adjustment. They feel immediate pressure about whether next year will look stable enough to plan life around. And that is why jobs feel less secure than ever, not because employment has vanished, but because the structure surrounding employment changes faster than the human need for predictability. Once that becomes clear, the hidden economic shift looks less like a mystery and more like the natural result of an economy built around flexibility, efficiency, technology, and continuous adaptation. The next time someone says work no longer feels safe, they may not be describing one company or one industry. They may be describing a wider economic reality where employment still exists, but certainty has become harder to hold on to because the system now rewards movement more than permanence,